Welcome back to the deep dive, and welcome to what is, for us, a really monumental day. And we hope for you, the learner, too.
It really is.
Today marks our quinquennial reflection.
Hmm.
5 years. 5 years since we first sat down and decided to trade in, the predictable for the profoundly intricate.
It's a testament, I think, to the audiences, to your insatiable curiosity. And, well, frankly, our ability to convince you that these highly obscure philosophical arguments are worth your time.
We did promise you shortcuts to being well-informed, but today we are taking the scenic route, the mountainous, unnecessarily convoluted, and probably treacherous route back to the beginning.
To celebrate this milestone, we're returning to our roots, back to the source.
And to do that properly, we're attempting something, I think, truly audacious. We're going back to the foundational concepts of the very first deep dive we ever recorded.
Back when we were, let's be honest, indulging our own, perhaps overly academic interests.
Oh, for sure. That first show was about pataphors, cacophonodiscalational transference, and concepts so dense they could probably warp space-time.
I think they did, a little.
So today, we are diving into the final, densest segment of that initial broadcast, a segment we titled with what I can only describe as maximum unadulterated pretension.
Go on, say it.
The zenith of pseudo-floxinophilamahilipilifications, a gawkumentary on Metakitschological Galamorphology.
The gloves are truly off. We are putting our collective brains through a philosophical grinder with this one. We're revisiting material that is, by its very nature, an intellectual barrier.
Yeah, back then, we lovingly called this a pulchritudinous topic.
Right, beautifully complex, intellectually ornate, but also, and this is the key, it's fundamentally an argumentum ad crumentum.
Okay, let's pause right there because that's a crucial starting point. An argumentum ad crumentum, that's an appeal to wealth or status, but not, financial wealth.
No, not at all. It's intellectual gatekeeping. The source material is essentially saying, if you, the reader, can understand this, congratulations, you're part of the elite.
And if you struggle, you just lack the conceptual wealth required to even be at the table.
Exactly. It demanded a higher barrier to entry from the very beginning. It implicitly asserted a certain level of, let's say, conceptual wealth from the intellectual hoi polloi, the generally educated populace.
So our mission today is to unpack that sheer density and really the deliberate antagonism of these concepts. We have to acknowledge the initial shock and awe. This is not easy stuff.
No. But the core conflict of this whole philosophical approach is immediate. It utterly defies what the source calls the quotidian banality of conventional narrative structures.
It just refuses to play nice.
Yeah.
It doesn't want you to get comfortable. It doesn't want you to relax. It wants you to struggle, to actually feel the strain of processing information that is structurally designed to resist being processed.
And that deliberate refusal to comply with traditional storytelling, which, relies on a stable, predictable foundation, that's the key to understanding everything that follows. That antagonism is the starting point.
Okay, so let's unpack that starting point. We have to begin with the foundational literary framework that makes this whole philosophical resistance possible, the paradoxical juxtaposition.
Right. This is where high culture meets a kind of conceptual warfare. It's a spectacle of linguistic maximalism.
The source describes it as a blending of two immensely complex literary styles, both from the Spanish Baroque period. And this combination results in that state of paradoxical juxtaposition.
And this combination is so deliberate, it's not an accident. It acts as the primary weapon in their entire rhetorical arsenal.
So first up, we have culturanismo. Now, if you've ever had the, pleasure or pain of studying 17th century Spanish poetry, you know this style. It's defined by its Baroque convolution.
Hyper-ornamented language, incredibly complex syntax, really obscure mythological or classical allusions. It's aesthetic maximalism pushed to its absolute extreme.
The beauty is in its sheer impenetrability. It's like looking at an incredibly ornate gilded gate that you have absolutely no key for.
That's a great way to put it. And then this stylistic maximalism is fused with its opposite number, conceptismo.
Right, and conceptismo is not about ornamentation. It's defined by its conceptual cerebral complexity.
Exactly. It's all about wit, sharp intellect, puns, wordplay, and the ability to pack immense philosophical meaning into these terse, often ambiguous statements. It's the intellectual efficiency argument.
So you got this aesthetic overload on one hand, the Baroque maximalism of culturanismo, and then on the other, you have the intellectual compression of conceptismo.
And when you smash them together?
You get the paradoxical flexposition. It's a style that is somehow simultaneously overwhelming in its description and breathtakingly concise in its conceptual payload.
It's beautiful, but as you said, intentionally unusable. And critically, this entire stylistic architecture serves a rhetorical purpose. It's designed to function as a tu quoque.
To quote. So counter-accusation. It's pointing the finger right back at you, the reader.
Precisely.
But how does a literary style accuse the reader of anything?
It challenges your preconceived a priori perception of reality. The style is so unstable, so complex, that the underlying assumption being challenged is your faith in a stable, knowable, Newtonian reality.
Wait, okay, so the text is implicitly saying, you think this sentence structure is convoluted and unstable. Just wait until you really examine the reality you're standing on.
That's it. The convoluted language is part of the philosophical argument. It's meta-commentary suggesting that if language, which is supposed to organize our reality, is the structurally precarious, then reality itself must be just as fragile.
It's using its own complexity as proof of reality's instability.
Yeah.
That's actually brilliant.
It is. It's the essence of their critique. They're suggesting that the perceived stability of reality, what the uninitiated might just call common sense, is itself so simple and rigid that it borders on philosophical absurdity.
So this complexity is their way of mirroring the inherent hidden chaos of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So who are the people practicing this philosophy of chaos? We need to meet the practitioners, the intellectualism cadre.
The source labels them the veritable Gabalists of the abstruse.
The tax collectors of the obscure.
I love that. They deal exclusively in that which is difficult, dense, and intellectually taxing. They are the gatekeepers, the intellectual snobs who deliberately make their work difficult to read just to maintain that exclusivity.
And their emotional approach to this dense work is maybe the most bizarre part.
Mm-hmm.
They explore the perendinational contours, so the deep, future-facing aspects of their philosophy.
With a blend of lacrimosa motia and insouciansimist flair.
Which is just an insane combination.
It's the emotional paradox we have to unpack. Lacrimosa motia is this tearful, sentimental emotion. They are deeply, almost mournfully invested in the tragic state of conventional thought. They weep for the stupidity of the masses.
But they do this alongside insouciansimist flair, this air of just careless indifference about whether anyone ever actually reads or understands their work.
It's like a highly intellectual, esoteric performance artist who weeps profoundly over a piece of obscure conceptual art, but then, posts a picture of it online with a shrug emoji, completely indifferent to the engagement.
They care so deeply about the internal truth, but not at all about external validation.
Exactly. The emotional paradox reflects the aesthetic and conceptual one. Deeply committed, yet completely unconcerned with approval. And all of this circles back to the conventional reality they despise, the structure they're questioning, the akamarakas.
The akamarakas, I love this word. But let's get a plain English definition. What is it?
Contextually, the akamarakas is the conventional framework. It's the baseline reality, the stable, predictable, quotidian structure we all just agree upon.
So common sense, Newtonian physics, the expectation that the sun will rise tomorrow.
Or the stable narrative structure of a typical novel. All of that is the akamarakas.
And their great philosophical insight is that the very existence of this simple, stable akamarakas might, to the, what was the phrase, the uninitiated lickspittle or dottypole.
The common simpleton.
It might epitomize the absurd.
And that's the key insight. This cadre defines the biggest obstacle to truth not as complexity, but as the assumption of simplicity. They're saying the conventional reality we take for granted is so painfully simplistic and lacking in nuance that it is, in itself, the greatest absurdity.
Simplicity as intellectual impoverishment.
That's it. The reality we take for granted, the very thing that's supposed to be the opposite of absurd, is actually the object of their ridicule. It's a kind of ignoratio elenchia, deliberate misdirection.
The supposed stability of the world is revealed to be irrelevant or, worse, actively misleading.
And what's fascinating is that the entire framework is built on this aggressive rejection. It's not just observing complexity, it's actively arguing that mainstream thinking is flawed because it's so simple and predictable. Which brings us perfectly to the methods they use to construct this anti-reality.
This is where we get into section 2. The methodology of absurdity and subtrivia. The original hosts observe what they called highfalutin argy-buffoonery, and I don't think you can describe it any better than that.
That argy-buffoonery constitutes the very essence of what they call sophistry ghanem. It's the practice of philosophical deception or, argumentative prowess, achieved through deliberate density and obscurity.
It's philosophical bullying,
Mm.
using deliberately complex tools to argue a deceptively simple and often really frustrating point.
Exactly. It's the art of sounding incredibly smart while saying something that deliberately frustrates mainstream logic. It relies on arcane allusions, these deliberately esoteric references, creating what the source calls a hyperbaton of the senses.
Okay, let's clarify that. Hyperbaton is a literary device,
Yeah.
right? Separating words that belong together for rhetorical effect, messing with sentence structure.
So a hyperbaton of the senses is a rhetorical separation of meaning and understanding itself. It assaults your cognitive ability. It forces you to jump conceptual gaps that shouldn't even exist in conventional writing. The text itself is actively fighting your brain.
And to demonstrate this intentional conceptual warfare, they give us the magnificent example of Lumpy Limperfinkel.
You have to love the name. It's just perfectly absurd.
It really is. So Limperfinkel's contribution is summarized in a single glorious word.
Gongoric lubricated obnubile aggregationalisms. A perfect demonstration of sophist trigonome.
Okay, we should break that monster down. Let's do it piece by piece so we can actually get the philosophical intent here.
All right. First, gongorical. This refers back to Luis de Gongora, the master of that impenetrable culturanismo style we talked about. So it's written in the style of highly dense Baroque convolution.
Okay, got it. Part one is impenetrably complex. What's next? Lubricated.
Lubricated suggests something slippery, smooth, maybe deceptive, or just difficult to grasp.
And finally, obnudal aggregationalisms.
Yeah.
Aggregation is a gathering. Obnubila means obscured or cloud-like.
So putting it all together, we have a slippery, obscure aggregation of highly complicated ideas, all written in an aggressively beautiful and impenetrable style.
It's perfect. And the initial reaction, the source says, by what they call uncritical philistology,
The non-academic mainstream.
is immediate dismissal. They just label it trivial or maudlin. They call it a nugatory dalliance in anniloquence mania.
Which is a fancy way of saying meaningless nonsense written by a word-obsessed maniac who enjoys wasting people's time.
Exactly. But this is where their critique gets really interesting. Because au contraire, the true reality, according to the cadre, is that Limperfinkel is delving deeper into the subtrivia of the Galamorphological multivicientia.
And we have to pause on subtrivia. If trivia is common knowledge, the stuff that is generally known but considered unimportant,
Then subtrivia is the minutiae of the absurd, the small, almost invisible components of the universe that, when you look at them through this aggressively philosophical lens, hold profound, though chaotic, meaning.
they're not looking at the big questions of life. They're looking at the tiny, seemingly meaningless fragments of reality and assigning them vast, chaotic importance.
And this search for meaning within the absurd minutiae is the Galamorphological multivicientia, the state of possessing multifaceted, strange knowledge.
And the process itself is described as a chaotic gignomandization. A gignomandization is a creation or a coming into being.
So a chaotic, uncontrolled creation process, perpetually looping back on itself. The knowledge is chaotic, the creation is chaotic, and the whole work is, as the source notes, an Ouroboros of ultracrepidarianisms.
Okay, the Ouroboros is the self-consuming serpent. We know that. Ultracrepidarianism is the habit of giving opinions and advice on matters way outside of one's own knowledge.
So it's a self-consuming serpent of people confidently offering opinions on things they know absolutely nothing about. That's the ultimate academic burn, isn't it? Wrapped up in a beautiful paradox.
The philosophical method literally feeds on its own overconfidence and this perpetual loop of what they call pseudo-paradoxicalizations.
It constitutes a complete Newgasset transmogrification of the discernible zeitgeist.
A transmogrification is a sudden, dramatic transformation. The entire point of sophistrigonum is to radically transform the spirit of the age, the zeitgeist, into something worthless.
That's the Newgassi part. Worthless.
Worthless. By demonstrating that everything you thought was stable is actually a pseudo-paradoxicalization or false contradiction, they are systematically turning the world's wisdom into conceptual trash.
But I have to ask, this sounds completely exhausting for the reader. The ultimate effect of encountering this material has to be frustration.
And that frustration is precisely engineered. The original deep dive noted that the jejune pataphysical concepts, the subtle, almost childishly simple, absurd ideas hidden inside all the complexity, are often the most frustrating part.
Right. And the source mentions the deliberate ethopia, the rhetorical depiction of a character.
Of the lick, spittle, and the simp. These characters are intentionally simplistic strawmen. They suggest that even when the dense, highfalutin concepts are cloaked in this logic of pseudologicology, they still fail to capture the true, ineffable Heitsedas.
The sheer thisness of the Akamarakas.
Exactly. So they use complexity to prove that complexity fails, and then they use simplicity to prove that simplicity also fails.
And the reader is just left with the conclusion that the only reliable thing is the philosophical system's ability to self-destruct rational thought.
And it's through that process of self-sabotage that they find their academic center, which leads us directly into the heart of the matter, the definition of the central concepts themselves, framed as both academic and fundamentally churlish.
Right. Scholarly rudeness. Welcome to Section 3. Metakitschological Galamorphology and pseudofloxenocene Central to this high-concept churlishness hysteria is the concept defined by the venerable, or perhaps utterly disfatuous, Thester McNiebers.
McNiebers gives us the foundational idea that underpins all this complexity, Metakitschological Galamorphology, and he defines it with a wonderful blend of pithiness and arrogance, a pithiobris, as simply the subscience of imaginary solutions.
That phrase is a delicious Tata phrase. It's almost perfectly redundant. If a subscience studies imaginary solutions, its entire existence is conceptually predicated on things that don't actually exist.
It's a sub-parody. It's a conceptual glorification of traditional scientific methods. Instead of seeking real answers in a rational universe, this subscience posits that we can only find truth by inventing entirely fictional solutions and methodologies.
It's like designing a flawless, beautiful clockwork mechanism that only tells the time of a non-existent parallel dimension.
That's a perfect analogy, and this invention of imaginary solutions forces a radical rejection of the deterministic and rationalist Weltanschauung. The traditional logical cause and effect worldview is out the window.
They vehemently reject it. Instead, they embrace what the source calls artificentia, a kind of artificial essence.
And that essence is governed entirely by pure aleatory chance and the omnipresent, lugubrious absurd. The universe is governed by sad randomness, and for them, that's the most beautiful thing about it.
This isn't just observation, though. It's a full-scale repudiation, a move toward abstract phenomenality.
Abstract phenomenality is where the phenomenon being observed is utterly detached from any understandable structure or cause. In this realm, conventional logic is replaced by a kind of self-referential autolatresiology.
So the self-worship autolatry of the conceptual framework becomes the only guiding principle. It's completely divorced from any external verifiable truth.
But if they've rejected logic and external truth, how do they even analyze or understand this system? They must need a new metric, right? A way to measure the irrational.
They do. Understanding requires what the text calls the refractory turbidimutterance lens of anomalactometricities.
Wow. Okay, let's translate that lens. Refractory means resistant to control, and turbidimutterance suggests a cloudy or confusing vocalization.
So we have to view reality through a confusing, resistant lens that actively obscures what it's looking at.
And that lens is defined by anomalactometricities, which is described as a form of quantum quantometrics for the utterly irrational.
Okay, so if quantum quantometrics tries to measure the qualitative aspects of quantitative data, like the feeling of a number,
then anomalactometricities tries to measure the qualitative aspects of things that are fundamentally abnormal and irrational. It's an attempt to quantify the unquantifiable absurd, using deliberately complex jargon to mask the fact that they're really just measuring their own feelings about it.
And this brings us to the zenith of the whole discussion, the title's punchline. Pseudofloxenocene helipilifications.
Yes, and we need to slow down here because the definition is absolutely crucial. The original word, without the pseudo, is floxenocene helipilification.
Which means the habit of estimating something as worthless. It's also, fittingly, one of the longest non-medical words in the English language.
So you have the habit of estimating something as worthless, but when you preface it with pseudo, it becomes the false estimation of worthlessness.
This is the ultimate rhetorical tool born from this entire philosophical apparatus.
It is. It's a masterclass in equivocation, using ambiguous language to conceal the truth or avoid commitment. They are masters at pretending to dismiss something as valueless while secretly recognizing its profound, self-referential absurdity.
So the intellectual elite dismiss the Akamarakas, the normal world, as worthless. But it's a false estimation of worthlessness.
Yeah.
Because they secretly recognize that its very simplicity is profound, but only in the context of their own complex system.
The complexity of the word itself demonstrates how difficult it is to actually convey the concept of worthlessness. And it all underscores what they call the ontological conundrum of intercollectionality.
Intercollectionality, the conundrum of the internal gaps that exist even in seemingly continuous thought, the space between what we know and what the source calls the unennoblable.
The gap that cannot be obscured or clouded over. It's the gap between what we know and what their system declares is necessary for us to know.
And given all this extreme difficulty and antagonism, the reaction of the reader is the most surprising part. The source notes the surprising adulation that's given to the simple encounters, like the moments with the lickspittle or the simp.
Which is, ironically, the ultimate captatio benevolentia from the author. It's a way of seeking goodwill from the reader.
By making the reader feel smart for getting the absurdity of the straw man character, the author is performing a sublime form of sycophancy towards the concept of ontotortuality.
Ontotortuality, the twisting or torturing of being. So the ultimate act of flattery is recognizing that the reader is capable of appreciating the deliberate philosophical self-harm being inflicted by the text.
It is fascinating and completely exhausting. It's a highly intellectualized form of literary self-sabotage, which brings us perfectly to the actual praxis of the style. We get to see it in action, which moves us into Section 4.
Section 4, the praxis of Gorgelstorm and linguistic subversion. And Pratt Gorgelstorm is presented as the perfect example of this philosophy in action. He's all about the methodology of confusion.
His paralogismatography, his writing of false or faulty logic, was not, the text emphasizes, driven by teleological goals or ingratiating motivations.
He wasn't trying to achieve a specific final result. He wasn't trying to win over a crowd. He had no end goal, only the process.
His entire purpose was the convoluted, sometimes odious demonstration of pseudo-floxenos semi-helipilifications using something called subtrivia.
And we need to differentiate subtrivia from the subtrivia we discussed earlier.
Right, so if subtrivia was the minutiae of the absurd that held profound hidden meaning,
then subtrivia refers to the actual substance of the trivia, the seemingly worthless examples used, the nugatory literary and historical curios.
So he'd take a useless historical footnote like, I don't know, the exact time Napoleon sneezed on a specific battlefield, and use that as the vehicle to demonstrate how one estimates worthlessness falsely.
Exactly. The footnote itself is worthless. That's the subtrivia. But the philosophical exercise it enables is profound. That's the subtrivia.
So he takes a useless scrap, declares it profoundly absurd, and then proves its worthlessness, which is, ironically, the only way it achieves any value in his system. His entire body of work is a rhetorical aporia.
A state of irresolvable perplexity. It's designed to have no solution. It's a conceptual dead end by design.
And the key to his method, and this whole school of thought, is in the language itself. The source calls the language truly inventive and, my new favorite word, pugnilucent.
Pugnilucent. Something that shines or sparkles like a dagger. The language is aggressive and beautiful at the same time. It's an intellectual weapon that draws you in with its brilliance but wounds you with its complexity.
And this aggressive linguistic style is a perpetual bomfiologia highfalutin speech or oration, which is highly rhetorical, ornate language.
That achieves a state of extreme sesquipedanticism.
And this is a crucial point. It addresses the critique about all the jargon. The use of these obscenely long, often unnecessary words is not incidental. It is the point.
The sesquipedanticism is the conceptual barrier itself. It's the physical manifestation of that tu quoque, the counter-accusation telling the reader, you're too simple to handle this truth.
It's an active process of breaking the traditional contract between writer and reader through linguistic density. The writing is described as profoundly playful and subversively subfictional, achieving hypozeuxis.
Hypozeuxis. That's a rhetorical device where every clause or sentence is syntactically distinct, lacking subordination. It creates this barrage of independent thoughts.
Which prevents the reader from establishing a clear intellectual hierarchy. You can't tell which idea is supposed to support which. It's just a wall of assertions.
And this deliberate lack of hierarchy is amplified by the way the writing interacts directly with you, the reader. The source notes the technique of breaking the rhetorical fourth wall and using a disconcerting ad personam intimacy.
It speaks directly to you, making its absurd conclusions feel intensely personal. This personalized perplexity is the metaparadoxiality technique. It's psychological warfare against your own logic.
Which is key to the overall effect. It blurs the liminal fluxations of the achemarachus. The boundaries of conventional reality become fluid and indistinct.
And by getting you to question the text's ontogeneticism, the very origin and nature of the text itself, the writer successfully achieves conceptual gaslighting.
leading the reader into the cul-de-sac of incongruentitism.
A dead end of illogical thought. The writer intentionally convinces you that your own logical perception is faulty, trapping you in a state of intellectual contradiction where no stable truth exists.
It's a remarkably aggressive way to engage with literature. It makes the reader question their own sanity for even trying to understand it.
So, if the text deliberately leads the reader to this dead end, this cul-de-sac of incongruentitism, where can the philosophy possibly go next?
It has to make a leap, an epistemic jump, as the source calls it, to something beyond logic.
And this transition, this sudden switch from methodological critique to a philosophical destination, it feels necessary to frame the final purpose of all this preceding chaos. This moves us into Section 5, the pivot to eternity.
This epistemic jump, this sudden chronological and intellectual shift, is required precisely because the Achaemenid has been proven to be structurally unsound. The chaos has to resolve itself somewhere in an external, necessary realm.
And that realm is eternity. It's not a place you can point to on a map. It's described as a supraliminal realm, a realm beyond the threshold of experience. An anangen.
A metaphysical necessity. Eternity is the necessary philosophical space that must exist because the Achaemenid, the mundane, simplified world, is just so debilitatingly limited.
The universe needs a place for all the chaos to reside, and this place lies beyond the simple, prosaicious confines of the Achaemenid.
And eternity encapsulates a core imperative that uses their favorite technique, sesquipedalian textuology.
The term itself is long, which demonstrates the imperative. It's the requirement to transcend the intrinsic and often debilitating limitations of the Achaemenid through the use of complicated language.
And this necessity, this anangen, is also described as a profound argumentum ad lazarum for the intellectual elite.
The appeal to poverty, suggesting that the Achaemenid is intellectually impoverished and incapable of containing deep truth.
Only by using this maximalist language, despite its cacophylogenetical and obnubulous content,
It's ugly, confusing content.
can one explore the infinite possibilities of the imaginationis lux, the light of the imagination. And this is where the whole enterprise finds its telesophicality, its philosophical goal. This ultimate state of eternity is the sine qua non, the essential condition of the entire venture, a state of non-committal opacity.
Opaque, yet non-committal. It refuses to solidify into a recognizable or accountable form, even as it claims to be the final destination.
It's the ultimate literary flibbertifangle, a frivolous or deceptive concept. It's a conceptual xylographic etching onto the intellectual tabula rasa.
Engraving a complex, beautiful falsehood onto the blank slate of the mind. And its method is guarded by univocal hermeneutics.
A closed, self-referential, or single-minded interpretation. The hermeneutics, the theory of interpretation, is entirely contained within the philosophy itself. It ensures that external logic or critique cannot penetrate it.
You can't use outside rules to judge their game.
Exactly. And this entire conceptual framework of eternity with its intermediarchy, its structure of endless governance, it actually prefigures later, more recognizable movements. It has a real legacy.
It does. The source clearly points out that eternity influenced the antinomythologism techniques of the surrealists and absurdist writers.
Antinomythologism being the rejection of conventional myth or narrative, often by creating inherent contradictions or paradoxes. This radical rejection of logic resonates deeply with existentialist philosophy, which came decades later.
Yeah, the existentialist movement, which is often cloaked in rhetorical blandishment, is said to have emerged from eternity like a phoenix from the ashes of intellectual carking grudgianism.
The frustration, the aggressive spite, the internal bickering of the intellectual infighting, the carking grudgianism, that was the fertile ground from which the serious philosophical pursuit of the absurd actually arose.
And the legacy of this thinking, exemplified by the intellectual mountebanks and sophists who followed, it forms a kind of cult of personality around the notion of perpetual intellectual furtivism.
Intellectual furtivism, the idea that the truest intellectual endeavors must remain hidden, elusive, or perpetually in the process of being obscured. They define their success by their inaccessibility.
It forces us, the audience, to value the act of deep diving into its complexity, because the complexity itself is the entire point.
It's an almost exclusive rite of passage. If you successfully navigate this landscape of purposeful jargon, you've earned your place in the cadre, even if the destination, eternity, is defined by that non-committal opacity.
So we've reached the final critique. This dense, winding journey has a concluding purpose, and it is not to give us a comfortable answer.
Moving into the outro, metasentia and the unlearnable. The source acknowledges the common accusations leveled at this kind of work. Garrel of vituperation.
Wordy, abusive criticism.
Or being intellectual coxcombablement.
Vain, foolish talk.
Right. But the hosts insist that this work offers a radical, almost heuristicidalism critique of scientific and philosophical orthodoxy.
Heuristicidalism, the killing or destruction of established discovery methods. The intent isn't just to offer a different view, but to systematically dismantle the accepted means of arriving at knowledge.
They want to burn down the entire library of conventional thinking.
And it does this using language that is truly innovative and acutalexic sharp-worded and rife with rhetorical devices like pleonasm, redundancy, and perisosis, rhetorical balance.
So the language is somehow simultaneously redundant and perfectly balanced, creating this hypnotic, persuasive effect that transcends logic.
And ultimately, the entire endeavor, with its self-referential structure and its rejection of external validation, is described as the ultimate expression of autolatry.
Self-worship. The philosophical system exists only to celebrate its own existence and its inherent superiority to the akamarakas.
And the final concept, posited as the ultimate obsequious truth, is metasentia.
Metasentia. The knowledge of knowledge, or maybe the knowledge beyond knowledge. It's the final state you achieve when you've successfully navigated the entire apparatus of pseudoflaccus and hilapilifications and rejected the akamarakas.
It's the ultimate humble truth that supposedly underlies all the complexity, yet it remains completely elusive.
This whole densely hyperbolic topic remains an enduring document, something intended to be gawked at, to the peripatetic pugnacity school of thought.
The school, characterized by its wandering, aggressive intellectualism.
It is continually inspiring and perplexing, demonstrating a kind of genius through inherent incongruous logic across this entire quinquennium of modern thought and beyond.
It has been a veritable honorificabilitude innatatibus, a state of honorableness of the unlearnable. And that, I think, is the final thought we leave with you, the learner.
The value of knowledge here doesn't lie in acquisition or utility, but in embracing its own inherent contradictions and its own absurdity.
It challenges you to consider the value of seeking knowledge that is designed to be fundamentally irresolvable. It forces you to ask, is the intellectual posture, the rigorous, aggressive complexity, the only real truth we can reliably grasp?
A fitting reflection for 5 years of the deep dive.
And a complex challenge we encourage you to mull over until our next transmission. We bid you, the esteemed gongoozlers, those who stare intently at something useless, and snout-farists.
Those with a pleasing countenance.
Of the ether waves, a most fond and structurally complex farewell.
Until the next transmission from beyond the liminal fluxations of the akamarakas, goodbye.